Hi, everyone.
Hi,
Hi,
Miss.
Miss.
How's everyone?
Fine, Alhamdulillah.
Alhamdulillah. Okay, first let me explain that I have put the new weekly plan on SMS, but I'm going to make a couple of changes. So as soon as I'm finished these sessions, I'll remove this morning and I'll re-upload the new one. Okay, so we're going to continue with reading To Kill a Mockingbird. If you remember last week, the women of the church was having a big meeting at Atticus's home, okay? And the women were gossiping and talking about the Black people. And finally, Miss Maudie had enough because she's sitting there listening to all of them and she's thinking what big hypocrites everyone is. So Miss Merriweather says, I'll tell you, there are some good but misguided people in this town. Good but misguided. I'm sorry, I'm on page 237 in the PDF. She said, folks in this town who think they're doing right. Now, far be it from me to say who, but some of them in this town thought they were doing the right thing a while back, but all they did was stir them up. When she says stir them up, she's talking about the Black people. And the person that she's talking about here is Atticus, okay? She said it might have looked like the right thing to do at the time. I'm sure I don't know. I'm not read in that field. I'll tell you, if my Sophie, now Sophie is the Black lady that works for her, kept it up another day, I'd have let her go. She said she would have fired her. Now, this next sentence was so racist. She said, it's never entered that wool of hers. Here, they called the Black people's hair wool back then. She said it never entered that wool of hers, that the only reason I kept her is because it's depression zone and she needs her $1.25 every week she can get. So you can see she only paid her $1.25 every week. Now, all of a sudden, Miss Molly says, his food doesn't stick going down, does it? She's relating this to if someone says something while they're eating and they say the wrong thing, basically they choke on their own words, okay? So Miss Maudie here is talking about Atticus. She's very upset about what Miss Merriweather has said. So she said, his food doesn't stick going down, does it? And here Scout says, Miss Maudie said it. 2 tight lines had appeared at the corners of her mouth. She had been sitting silently beside me, her coffee cup balanced on one knee. I had lost the thread of conversation long ago when they quit talking about Tom Robinson's wife and had contented myself with thinking of Finch's Landing and the river. N. Alexander had got it backwards. The business part of the meeting was blood-curdling. The social hour was dreary. So at this point, Miss Merriweather says, Maudie, I'm sure I don't know what you mean. And Miss Maudie says, I'm sure you do. And then she said no more. Sorry, guys. Scout goes on. Scout goes on to explain that when Miss Maudie was angry, her brevity was icy. She suddenly turned into a very cold person. Something had made her deeply angry, and her gray eyes were as cold as her voice. Mrs. Merriweather reddened and glanced at me and looked away. I couldn't see Miss Farrell. Ann Alexander got up from the table and swiftly passed more refreshments, neatly engaging Miss Merriweather and Mrs. Gates in brisk conversation. In other words, here Aunt Alexandra is trying to change the subject. When she had them well on the road with Miss Perkins, Aunt Alexandra stepped back. She gave Miss Maudie a look of pure gratitude, and I wondered at the world of women. Miss Maudie and Aunt Alexandra had never been especially close, and here was Auntie silently thanking her for something. What is she thanking her for, do you know?
For making them change the subject.
No. Well, kind of in a way, but what she's thanking her for first is because she stood up for Atticus. Okay? Everyone understand?
Yes.
Okay. I was content to learn that Aunt Alexandra could be pierced sufficiently to feel gratitude for help given. There was no doubt about it. I must soon enter this world where on its surface, fragrant ladies rocked slowly, fanned gently, and drank cool water. But I was more at home in my father's world. People like Mr. Heck Tate did not trap you with innocent questions to make fun of you. Even Jim was not highly critical unless you said something stupid. Ladies seemed to live in faint horror of men, seemed unwilling to approve wholeheartedly of them. But I liked them. There was something about them, no matter how much they cussed and drank and gambled and chewed, no matter how undelectable they were, there was something about them that I instinctively liked. They weren't hypocrites, Mrs. Perkins, born hypocrites, Mrs. Merriweather was saying. At least we don't have that sin on our shoulders down here. People up there set them free, but you don't see them sitting at the table with them. At least we don't have the deceit to say to them, yes, you're as good as we are, but stay away from us. Down here, we just say you live your way and we'll live ours. I think that woman, that Mrs. Roosevelt's lost her mind, just plain lost her mind coming down to Birmingham and trying to sit with them. If I was the mayor of Birmingham, neither of us was the mayor of Birmingham, but I wished I was the governor of Alabama for one day. I'd let Tom Robinson go so quick, the Missionary Society wouldn't have time to catch his breath. Calpurnia was telling Miss Rachel's cook the other day how bad Tom was taking things, and she didn't stop talking when I came into the kitchen. She said there wasn't a thing Atticus could do to make being shut up easier for him, that the last thing he said to Atticus before they took him down to the prison camp was, "Goodbye, Mr. Finch. There ain't nothing you can do now, so there ain't no use trying." Calpurnia said Atticus told her that the day they took Tom to prison, he just gave up hope. She said Atticus tried to explain things to him and that he must do his best not to lose hope because Atticus was doing his best to get him free. Miss Rachel's cook asked Calpurnia, why didn't Atticus just say, yes, you'll go free and leave it at that? Seemed like that'd be a big comfort to Tom. Calpurnia said, because you ain't familiar with the law. First thing you learn when you're in a law and family is there ain't any definite answers to anything. Mr. Finch couldn't say something, so when he doesn't know for sure, so. All right. Adam, would you read, please?
Okay, miss.
Right here.
The front door slammed and I heard Atticus's footsteps in the hall. Automatically, I wondered what time it was. Not nearly time for him to be home, and on missionary society days, he usually stayed downtown until black dark. He stopped in the doorway. His hat was in his hand, and his face was white. "Excuse me, ladies," he said. "Go right ahead with your meeting. Don't let me disturb you, Alexandra. Could you come to the kitchen a minute? I want to borrow Calpurnia for a while." He didn't go through the dining room, but went down the back hallway and entered the kitchen from the rear door. Aunt Alexandra and I met him. The dining room door opened again and Miss Maudie joined us. Calpurnia had half risen from her chair. Cal, Atticus said, I want you to go with me out to Helen Robinson's house. What's the matter? Aunt Alexandra asked, alarmed by the look on my father's face. Tom's dead. Aunt, Aunt Alexandra put her hands on her mouth. They shot him, said Atticus. He was running. It was during their exercise period. He said he just broke into a blind raving charge at the fence and started climbing over, right in front of them. Didn't they try to stop him? Didn't they give him any warning? Aunt Alexandra's voice shook. Oh yes, the guards called him to stop. They fired a few shots in the air, then to kill. They got him just as he went over the fence. They said if he had two good arms, he'd have made it. He was moving that fast. 17 bullet holes in him. They didn't have to shoot him that much. Cat, I want you to come out with me and help me tell Helen. Yes, sir, she murmured, fumbling at her apron. Miss Maudie went to Calpurnia and untied it. This is the last straw, Atticus, Aunt Alexandra said. Depends on how you look at it, he said. What was one Negro more or less among 200 of them? He wasn't home to them. He was an escaping prisoner. Atticus leaned against the refrigerator, pushed down his glasses, rubbed his eyes. We had such a good chance, he said. I told him what I thought, but I couldn't in truth say that we had more than a good chance. I guess Tom was tired of white men's chances and preferred to take his own. Ready, Cal? Yes, sir, Mr. Finch. Let's go. Then let's go. Aunt Alexandra sat down in Calpurnia's chair and put her hands to her face. She sat quite still. She was so quiet I wondered if she would faint. I heard Miss Maudie breathing as if she had just climbed the steps, and in the dining room the ladies chattered happily. I thought Aunt Alexandra was crying, but when she took her hands away from her face, she wasn't. She looked weary. She spoke, and her voice was flat. I can't say I approve of everything he does, Modi, but he's my brother, and I just want to know when will this ever end? Her voice rose. It tears him to pieces. He doesn't show it much, but it tears him to pieces. I've seen him when. What else do they want from him, Modi? What else? Who want? Alexandra, Miss Modi asked. I mean, this town, they're perfectly willing to let him do what they're too afraid to do themselves. It might lose him a nickel. They're perfectly willing to let him wreck his health doing what they're afraid to do. They're Be quiet. They're hear you, Miss Modi, said Miss Modi. Have you ever thought of it this way, Alexandra? Whether Makeup knows it or not, we're paying the highest tribute we can pay a man. We trust him to do right. It's that simple. Who? Aunt Alexandra never knew she was echoing her 12-year-old nephew. The handful of people in this town who say that fair play isn't marked white only. The handful of people who say a fair trial is for everybody, not just us. The handful of people with enough humility to think when they look at a Negro, there but for the Lord's kindness am I. Miss Modi's old crispness was returning. The handful of people in this town with background, that's who they are. Had I been attentive, I would have had another scrap to add to Jim's definition of background, but I found myself shaking and couldn't stop. I had seen Enfield Prison Farm, and Atticus had pointed out the exercise yard to me. It was the size of a football field. Stop that shaking, commanded Miss Modi, and I stopped. Get up, Alexandra. We've left him long enough. Aunt Alexandra rose and smoothed the various whalebone ridges along her hips. She shook her handkerchief from her belt and wiped her nose. She patted her hair and she said, "Do I show it?" "Not a sign," said Miss Modi. "Are you together again, Jean Louise?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then let's join the ladies," she said grimly. Their voices swelled when Miss Modi opened the door to the dining room. Aunt Alexandra was ahead of me, and I saw her head go up as she went through the door. "Oh, Mrs. Perkins," she said, "you need some more coffee. Let me get it." "Calpurnia's on an errand for a few minutes." "Grace," said Miss Modi, "let me pass you some more of those dewberry tarts. Do you hear what that cousin of mine did the other day? The one who likes to go fishing?" And so they went down the row of laughing women around the dining room, refilling coffee cups or dishing out goodies as though their only regret was the temporary domestic disaster of losing Calpurnia. The gentle hum began again. "Yes, sir, Mrs. Perkins, that J. Grimes Everett is a martyred saint. He needed to get married, so they ran to the beauty parlor every Sunday afternoon. Soon as the sun goes down, he goes to the bed with the chickens, a crate full of sick chickens. Fred says that's what it all started it all. Fred says Aunt Alexandra looked across the room at me and smiled. She looked at a tray of cookies on the table and nodded at them. I carefully picked up the tray and watched myself walk to Mrs. Merriweather with my best company manners. I asked her if she would have some. After all, if Auntie could be a lady at a time like this, so could I.
Okay. So do you have any questions, anyone? What do you think about how many times they shot Tom Robinson? I
I
think,
17
think
times.
I think it
this
was a
is
little excessive.
excessive.
Yes. It didn't take 17 shots to kill him. So that tells us for sure they wanted him dead. Any other questions?
No.
All right, Jenna, would you read?
Yes, don't do that, Scout. Sit him out on the back steps. Jem, are you crazy? I said, sit him out on the back steps. Sighing, I scooped up the small creature, placed him on the bottom step, and went back to my cot. September had come, but not a trace of cool weather with it, and we were still sleeping on the back screen porch. Lightning bugs were still about. The night crawls, the crawlers, and flying insects, the beat against the screen, the summer long had not gone wherever they go when autumn comes. A roly-poly had found his way inside the house. I reasoned that the tiny vermin had crawled up the steps and under the floor. I was putting my book on the floor beside my cot when I saw him. The creatures are no more than an inch long, and when you touch them, they roll themselves into a tight gray ball. I lay on my stomach, reached down and poked him. He rolled up, then, feeling safe, I suppose, he slowly unrolled. He traveled a few inches on his 100 legs, and I touched him again. He rolled up, feeling sleepy. I decided to end things. My hand was going down on him when Jim spoke. Jim was calling. It was probably a part of stage he was going through, and I wished he would hurry up and get through it. He was certainly never cruel to animals, but I had never known his charity to embrace the insect world. Why couldn't I mash him? I asked. Because they don't bother you. Jim answered in the darkness. He had turned out his reading light. Reckon you're at the stage now where you don't kill flies and mosquitoes now. I reckon, I said. Let me know when you change your mind. Tell you one thing, though, I ain't gonna sit around and not scratch a red bug. Oh, dry up, he answered drowsily. Jim was the one who was getting more like a girl every day, not I. Comfortable, I lay on my back and waited for sleep. And while waiting, I thought of Dill. He had left us the first of the month with firm assurance that he would return the minute school was out. He guessed his folks had got the general idea that he liked to spend his summers in Macomb. Miss Rachel took us with them in the taxi to Macomb Junction, and Dill waved to us from the train window until he was out of sight. He was not out of mind. I missed him. The last 2 days of his time with us, Jim had taught him to swim. Taught him to swim. I was wide awake, remembering that Dill had told me. Parker's, remembering what Dill had told me. Parker's Eddy is at the end of dirt road off an Meridian Highway about a mile from town. It is easy to catch a ride down the highway on a cotton wagon or from a passing motorist, and the short walk to the creek is easy. But the prospect of walking all the way back home at dusk when the traffic is light is tiresome, and swimmers are careful not to stay too late. According to Dill, he and Jim had just come to the highway when they saw Atticus driving toward them. He looked like he had not seen them, so they both waved. Atticus finally slowed down. When they caught up with him, he said, "You'd better catch a ride back. I won't be going home for a while." California was in the back seat. Jim protested, then pleaded, and Atticus said, "All right, you can come with us if you stay in the car." On the way to Tom Robinson's, Atticus told them what had happened. They'll hear, um, what? Oh, okay. They turned off the highway, rode slowly by the dump and past the Ewell residence, down the narrow lane to the Negro cabins. Dill said a crowd of black children were playing marbles in Tom's front yard. Atticus parked the car and got out. California followed him through the front gate. Dill heard him ask one of the children, "Where your mother, Sam?" and heard Sam say, "She down at Sis Stevens, Mr. Finch. Want me run fetch her?" Dill said Atticus looked uncertain. Then he said yes, and Sam scampered off. "Go on with your game, boys," Atticus said to the children. A little girl came out. A little girl came to the cabin door and stood looking at Atticus. Dill said her hair was a wad of tiny, stiff pigtails, each ending in a bright bow. She grinned from ear to ear and walked toward our father, but he was too small to navigate the steps. Dill said Atticus went to her, took off his hat, and offered her his finger. She grabbed it and he eased her down the steps. Then he gave her to California. Sam was trotting behind his mother when they came up. Dill said, Helen said, "Evening, Mr. Finch. Won't you have a seat?" But she didn't say any more. Never did Atticus. "Scout," said Dill. She just fell down in the dirt. Just fell down in the dirt, like a giant with a big foot just came along and stepped on her. "Just jump." Dill's fat foot hit the ground, like you'd step on an ant. Dill said California, and Atticus lifted Helen to her feet and half carried, half walked her to the cabin. They stayed inside a long time, and Atticus came out alone. When they drove back by the dump, some of the ewels hollered at them, but Dill didn't catch what they said. Beacom was interested by the news of Tom's death for perhaps 2 days. 2 days was enough for the information to spread through the country. "Did you hear about?" "No." "Well, they say he was running, fit to beat lightning." To Macon, Tom's death was typical. Typical of a nigger to cut and run. Typical of a nigger's mentality to have no pain, no plan, no thought for the future. Just run blind first chance he saw. Funny things, Atticus Finch might have got him off scot-free. But wait, hell no. You know how they are? Easy come, easy go. Just shows you that Robinson boy was legally married. They say he kept himself clean, went to church and all that. But when it comes down to the line, the veneer's mighty thin, nigger always comes out on him. A few more details, enabling the listener to beat his version in turn, then nothing to talk about until the Macomb Tribune appeared the following Thursday. There was a brief obscurity in the colored news, but there was also an editorial.
Okay, thank you, Jana.
You're
All
welcome.
right, what questions do you have? None? Everyone understands? All right, Farah Mala, would you read, please?
Yes, Muslim. Starting from Mr. B.B.
Yes.
Underwood.
Yeah, babe.
Mr. B.B. Underwood was at his most bitter, and he couldn't have cared less who cancelled advertising and subscriptions. But Maycomb didn't play that way. Mr. Underwood could holler till he sweated and write whatever he wanted to. He'd still get his advertising and subscriptions if he wanted to make a fool of himself. In his paper, that was his business. Mr. Underwood didn't talk about miscarriages of justice, but he was writing so children could understand. Mr. Underwood simply figured it was a sin to kill cripples, but be they standing, sitting, or escaping. He likened Tom's death to the senseless slaughter of songbirds by hunters and children. And Maycomb thought he was trying to write an editorial poetical enough to be reprinted in the Montgomery Advisors. Advertiser. How could this be so? How could this be so? I wondered as I read Mr. Underwood's editorial. Senseless killing. Tom had been given due to process of law to the day of his death. He had been tried openly and convicted by 12 good men and true. My father had fought for him all the way. When Mr. Underwood's meaning became clear, Atticus had used every tool available to free men to save Tom Robinson. But in the secret courts of men's hearts, Atticus had no case. Tom was a dead man the minute Mayla Ewell opened her mouth and screamed. The name Ewell gave me a queasy feeling. Maycomb had lost no time in getting Mr. Ewell's views on Tom's demise and passing them along through that English channel of gossip, Miss Stephanie Crawford. Miss Stephanie told Aunt Alexandra in Jem's presence, "Oh, Foot, he's old enough to listen." That Mr. Ewell said it made one down and about 2 more to go. Jem told me not to be afraid. Mr. Ewell was more hot gas than anything. Jem also told me that if I breathed a word to Atticus, if in any way I let Atticus know, I knew Jim would personally never speak to me again.
Okay, 1 second, Farah. All right, does everyone understand what's happened here? First of all, about Mr. Underwood and his writing. Everyone understands? Okay, she had, Scout was kind of confused in the beginning about what Mr. Underwood was writing in his paper. She basically thought that he was taking up for the jury and saying that, you know, everything that happened to Tom, he deserved. When actually he was saying that it was a senseless killing and that Tom had been given due process of the law to the day of his death. Here he says he had been tried openly and convicted by 12 good men and true, and that my father had fought for him all the way. Then all of a sudden, his meaning became clear to Scout. Atticus had used every tool available to free men to save Tom Robinson, but in the secret courts of men's hearts, Atticus had no case. Tom was a dead man the minute Mayella Ewell opened her mouth and screamed. Now, in other words, Mr. Underwood is saying, if you read between the lines, that it wouldn't have mattered what Atticus would have done, that Tom was a dead man right from the beginning of the trial, just simply because of the fact that he was a black man and he was accused of assaulting a white woman, okay? Here, Scout says the name Ewell gave me a queasy feeling. In other words, it makes her sick. Maycomb lost no time in getting Mr. Ewell's views on Tom's demise and passing them along through the channel of gossip. Miss Stephanie Crawford, Miss Stephanie told Ann Alexander in front of Jim that Mr. Ewell had said it made one down and about two more to go. Well, one of those two is Atticus. In other words, one down is Tom, so one is dead, but there's still two more to go. Atticus is one of them. And at this point, Jim tells Scout not to be afraid, that Mr. Ewell was more about hot gas than anything. He also told her, do not breathe a word about this to Atticus, okay? He said, if you do, I'll never speak to you again. All right, Farah, will you continue, please?
Yes, Miss Lynn. School started, and so did our daily trips past the Radley place. Jem was in the 7th grade, and went to high school beyond the grammar school building. I was now in the 3rd grade, and our routines were so different. I only walked to school with Jim in the mornings and saw him at mealtimes. He went out for football, but was too slender and too young yet to do anything but carry the team water buckets. This he did with enthusiasm. Most afternoons he was seldom home before dark. The Radley place had ceased to terrify me, but it was no less gloomy, no less chilly under its great oaks, and no less uninviting. Mr. Nathan Radley could still be seen on a clear day, walking to and from town. We knew Boo was there, for the same old reason. Nobody'd seen him carried out yet. I sometimes felt a twinge of remorse when passing by the old place at ever having taken part in what must have been sheer torment to Arthur Radley. What reasonable recluse wants children peeping through his shutters, delivering greetings, and on the end of a fishing pole, wandering in the collards at night? And yet I remembered 2 Indian head pennies, chewing gum, soap dolls, a rusty medal, a broken watch and chain. Jem must have put them away somewhere. I stopped and looked at the tree one afternoon. The trunk was swelling around its cement patch. The patch itself was turning yellow. We had almost seen him a couple of times, a good enough score for anybody. But I still looked for him each time I went by. Maybe someday we would see him. I imagined how it would be when it happened. He'd just be sitting in the swing when I came along. How do you do, Mr. Arthur? I would say, as if I had said it every afternoon of my life. Evening, Jean Louise, he would say, and if he had said it every afternoon of my life, right pretty spell we're having, isn't it? Yes, sir, right pretty, I would say, and go on.
Okay, Farah, stop 1 minute, baby. Sorry. All right, how old was Scout when the story begins? What grade was she in?
3. He was 6.
When the story first began, how old was she?
6.
Yes.
6.
And what
6 years
grade?
old. 1.
Yeah, she went into grade 1. Now she's in grade 3. Okay. So 3 years have passed. And if you notice, Scout is starting to grow up a little bit because now she regrets everything they had done to torment Arthur Radley. For example, trying to peep through his shutters, sending him messages on the end of the fishing pole, wandering in his garden at night. And then she remembered about the things that had been put into the hole in the tree, the chewing gum, the Indian head pennies, that sort of thing. And she said at this time, we had almost seen him a couple of times. That was good enough for anybody. She said, but I still looked for him each time I went by. And she says that she could imagine that he would be sitting on the porch swing, okay? And she would say, howdy do, Mr. Arthur. And Boo would say, evening, Jean Louise, like they had known each other always and had always talked to each other like this. All right, Farah, sorry.
It's okay. It was only a fantasy. We would never see him. He probably did go out when the moon was down and gaze upon Miss Stephanie Crawford. I have picked somebody else to look at, but that was his business. He would never gaze at us. You aren't starting that again, are you? Said Atticus one night when I expressed a stray desire just to have one good look at Boo Radley before I died. If you are, I'll tell you right now, stop it. I'm too old to go chasing you off the Radley property. Besides, it's dangerous. You might get shot. You know, Mr. Nathan shoots at every shadow he sees, even shadows that leaf size 4 bear footprints. You were lucky not to be killed.
So right here,
hushed.
Farah, I'm sorry. I'm sorry, baby. Right here, we now know that Atticus knew that it was Scout and Jim and Deal that had went into the garden that night when Mr. Boo's brother shot the gun, Mr. Nathan, okay? So he's letting her know that he's aware that what they did. All right, Farah, sorry.
It's okay. I hushed then and there. At the same time, I marveled at Atticus. This was the first he had let us know he knew a lot more about something than we thought he knew. And it had happened years ago. No, only last summer. No, summer before last. When time was playing tricks on me. I must remember to ask Jim. So many things had happened to us. Boo Radley was the least of our fears. Atticus said he didn't see how anything else could happen. That things had a way of settling down, and after enough time passed, people would forget that Tom Robinson's existence was ever brought to their attention. Perhaps Atticus was right, but the events of the summer hung over us like smoke in a closed room. The adults in Maycomb never discussed the case with Jem and me. It seemed that they discussed it with their children, and their attitude must have been that neither of us could help having Atticus for a parent. So their children must be nice to us in spite of him. The children would never have thought that up for themselves. Had our classmates been left to their own devices, Jem and I would have had several swift, satisfying fistfights apiece and ended the matter for good. As it was, we were compelled to hold our heads high and be respectively a gentleman and a lady. In a way, it was like the era of Mrs. Henry Lafayette DuBose, without all her yelling. There was one odd thing, though, that I never understood. In spite of Atticus's shortcomings as a parent, people were content to re-elect him to the state uh, leg- leg-
Legislature.
legislature.